extreme weather events like hurricanes that cause evacuations and death affect your health and well-being tremendously.
Hi there, it's WAMC News Director Ian Pickus, and on this episode of the WAMC News Podcast, we speak with Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Chief Science Officer Alonzo Plough about a new report, The Impact of Extreme Weather on Views About Climate Policy in the United States. Well, according to the new national poll, more than 3/4 of adults have been personally affected by extreme weather in the past 5 years. And that experience makes them more likely to call climate change a crisis than those who haven't experienced a heat wave, hurricane, flooding, or the like. The poll from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, NPR, and Harvard Chan School of Public Health also measures attitudes about health and economic impacts of extreme weather. Okay, here's my conversation with Alonzo Plough.
What really jumps out is that people are making the connection between the extreme weather events, their severity and frequency, and climate change and health. I think a few years ago that would not have been the case, but given that every part of the country has been affected by this in some way, as you mentioned, heat in the south and west, flooding in the north and the southeast, many people are beginning to see this as a serious and real and urgent problem.
Is it just human nature to sort of not think about big picture things like climate change until you have a personal experience with it?
Well, I think the personal experience really grounds the broader awareness in the way that climate change was talked about. I mean, I think some of the early communication about climate change was about polar bears and melting ice caps and a couple of degrees Celsius rise in temperature. Those are all important and factual, but I think when it is grounded in the experience of flooding in your own home, wildfires causing you to be evacuated from your home, and the frequency and intensity of the recent hurricanes in the southeast, and that grounds it. That grounds the reality. And through the health lens, and all of those extreme weather events affect your health and well-being, it grounds it in personal experience and makes it real and urgent.
How do extreme weather events affect your health and well-being?
Well, certainly extreme weather events like hurricanes that cause evacuations and death affect your health and well-being tremendously. If you're forced to evacuate, if your home is destroyed, if you are without power and water, those are going to affect your health immediately. But the long-term effect of climate, let's say heat, is going to affect your health in the short run. Again, if you are poor and don't have air conditioning, it can cause death for older vulnerable people, and particularly children. But it also affects, in the West, water rationing and the ability for farmers in the Central Valley to actually grow crops. The Colorado River, which is a major source of water for the entire West, is at historic lows. So it's a dramatic effect on health and well-being, both in many indirect and direct ways.
Who is being affected by extreme weather and climate change?
Well, everyone is, but the point I think the survey is making, and our other research at the foundation demonstrates, is black and brown communities, poor communities, rural communities are affected more. If you think about who is living in big cities without access to parks and open spaces and trees and surrounded by asphalt without any mitigating factors, it's 20 degrees higher in those environments than those that are near parks and have shade. And if you combine that with not having air conditioning, you can see why heat is going to affect those urban neighborhoods more. Unfortunately, many low-income housing has been built in risky areas near chemical plants or other sources of pollution, and rising heat levels increases the amounts of particulates in the air, which increases the amount and prevalence of asthma in a community, particularly important for children. So there's a relationship between these unfair zoning and housing placement decisions and disproportionate effect on marginalized people.
Do we know, according to the poll, what type of extreme weather is most commonly experienced by respondents?
Well, yes, we know where the respondents are geographically, and they speak about their experiences in the threats that occur in their area. So Californians talk about wildfire and heat, and Texans talk about both heat and cold and the increasing intensity of hurricanes. And in Florida, both hurricanes and seawater rising, sea level rising, and heat. Again, there are 3 to 6 times more extreme heat days all around the country than there were a few years ago. So, yeah, the interesting thing about this is that it affects the whole country, climate and health, but in different ways in different regions.
Are more people today making a connection between the extreme weather they experience and climate change than did, 5-10 years ago? Do we know?
Looking at the survey, I was surprised with the extent that people are making this linkage. I think that, again, there's been a lot of reporting and weather reporting around the country that have been communicating the link between these extreme weather events and climate. It's resoundingly clear, the science is resoundingly clear that climate is caused, these climate changes are human caused. And I think that message is clearer than it was years ago. So, yes, I think that this is an increased understanding because of the experience that people are having all across the country of these extreme weather events affecting their well-being and health.
Well, separate from health impacts, this report also looks at economic impacts on people who've experienced extreme weather. And many people might be surprised to learn that oftentimes after an extreme weather event, government remuneration is not forthcoming for a lot of people. They struggle to put their lives back together.
It is devastating. Again, a home, a place, it's your home. It's your major for most all Americans. It's your major lifetime investment. It disrupts your life catastrophically, and so the well-being impacts of that and the time that it takes for responders or FEMA response to actually mitigate it takes a long time, and I think it has a long recovery trajectory. You cannot instantly reconstruct devastated neighborhoods that have experienced hurricanes. So it's a long-term disruption. In California, the wildfires destroyed entire neighborhoods, which are still being rebuilt, some of which will not be rebuilt because of their proximity to what are now the even more frequent wildfires. So the disruption of community and neighborhood and your home is just devastating on all counts.
What do you think about the idea of rebuilding in places that are prone to, as you say, gigantic wildfires that take down an entire, sector of a state, or creeping coastline where the science tells us 10, 15 years from now, this particular street's going to be underwater? Do we have to think differently about how we respond to these events?
We have to think differently. I'm an epidemiologist, but I think the actuaries are leading the way. The actuaries that are providing the data of what can be insured and what can be insured, they look at the data, they believe the science, and they are not approving investments in areas that are in these fragile zones. I think we just need to do more with economic incentives, approaches that provide a fair amount of money for relocation in certain cases, but we really need to address these risks head on and find equitable solutions so that individuals who may have to evacuate and not go back can find other places to live that will allow them to recreate a sense of neighborhood in place. But we do need more attention in zoning so that new houses and other businesses are not built in these floodplains, wildfire risk areas, or next to coast where there's sea level rising, so that the data needs to find its way into zoning policies.
How optimistic are you about where we go from here based on this report?
I am an eternal optimist that the combination of sound scientific evidence about the human cause of climate change, and combined with the growing awareness across the country of people who see this as real and part of their lives, is something that is going to provide the kind of change that we need to see. And I'm actually optimistic from some of the research and work we're doing with communities around the country that some of the change will come from the bottom up, from folks in neighborhoods and communities who will ask their policymakers to both deal with the adaptation to the real problems and mitigations, so this is less of an impact in the future. This is a problem that can be resolved through policy means and decisions around, but ultimately the human causes of climate change.
We've been speaking with Alonzo Plough, and he's Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Chief Science Officer. The new report is The Impact of Extreme Weather on Views about Climate Policy in the United States. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you.
All right, that does it for this episode of the WAMC News Podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, I'm Ian Pickus.